Hello, my name is Nathalie Khan, and welcome to Show Studio. Today, I've got an amazing set of panelists with me, and I'm super excited to get you all here and to talk about the amazing debut by Maximilian Davis for Salvatore Ferragamo. We have a lot to discuss today. I thought we had a little bit of time before, so I've heard this show had an amazing buzz. But before we start, I just wanted to give the panelists a moment to introduce themselves. Toni, do you want to go first?
Hi, my name is Toni Blaze. I'm editor-in-chief of Wonderland magazine, celebrity stylist, fashion, creative direction, all that jazz.
Hi, I'm Joshua Graham, and I'm the editorial assistant at Show Studio.
Hi, I'm Peter Talleyrand-Perigord, and I'm a writer, and I used to work in design and making.
Hi, I'm Lisa Ng, and I'm a corporate lawyer, so fashion neophyte, I guess.
That's amazing. So it's going to be so exciting to sort of unpack the show, this amazing shift at the House of Ferragamo, and sort of get your perspectives on it. So I think quickly, when I prepared for the show and sort of reflecting on that topic, first of all, I think I went to sort of considering, also thinking about this sort of huge shakeup, that we've had at Ferragamo. And with that, in 21, we had the appointment of Marco Gobbetti, who joined the house from Burberry, which I think is already a really exciting appointment. And then the following year, the appointment of Fashion East rising star, Maximilian Davis. And I think to discuss this topic, I think it would be best to focus on him first. So my first question to you guys is, how excited, from a scale of 1 to 1,000, are we about this appointment? And I don't mind who goes first, but how excited are we?
1,001. Was more than excited. I think when I first heard the news, I was like, not shocked, but I was like, whoa, this is crazy. Like, such a heritage brand, Italian as hell, has this like, black, from England, boy, Jamaican heritage. Like, basically the complete opposite of Milan Fashion Week, basically.
Amazing,
So
yes.
that, I was just like, whoa, this is like, at least like in my lifetime in the industry, I've been able to see something like this, I think it's
Absolutely.
like really exciting. So yeah, I was just like blown away. I'm still blown away. So, and even obviously going to actually being able to experience the show as well, like one for the books, so it was a good one.
Yeah, amazing.
I
Josh, how about you?
100% agree. I think he's only done those 3 Fashion East collections before getting appointed at Ferragamo. So we had an idea of kind of his signatures and his own codes, but it wasn't a career. It wasn't like, we didn't have this whole image, I think, of really what to expect when you do have the money and the backing and the power at a house like Ferragamo, which I thought was really exciting. And yeah, just being that young and that fresh kind of left a lot to the imagination about what it could be. And I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I'm very excited, 1,001 as well. I think it's great. It's also, I think no one really cared about Ferragamo for a really long time. It was a bit, we were saying earlier, it's a bit of an airport brand that people know, but you wouldn't think of specific pieces of clothing or anything. And it's exciting to see what someone like him is going to do. He's fabulously talented, and I think he's also the perfect candidate for it, because he's not a strictly London designer. Like, his work is very refined, it's very elegant. Like, London's often known for being quite crazy and crafty, and he's clearly not that. And I think, it's like a really interesting pairing.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
Well, I think from my point of view, what's interesting is that you have a brand that's been around, as mentioned, a heritage brand for a long time, which means that, as purely from a corporate side, if you're looking at it sort of value creation, if you're really happy with the model as it's been going on, plodding along with whatever profitability that you've been able to turn year after year for centuries, why now? Like what is it now that you need to recreate and need to do in order to create extra value? Because clearly the cogs behind that wheel is thinking, well, I need to do something different because we want to reach a different demographic, but not just people and that sort of consumerism, but also just in general of creating value and how that pushes that sort of profit margin to be higher.
Amazing, that's interesting. And I just kind of wanted to come back to you, and I looked obviously in preparation for today, I looked at sort of media coverage, what journalists are saying, you know, and a lot of them are talking about him being very young. I saw comments about him dropping out of the LVMH Young Talent competition to able to you know, sort of take that appointment. But I think there were also other comments which I thought was really good. And earlier piece by Sarah Mower, for example, she says, Davis is bringing together the smart dressing tradition of Trinidadian background. And I think to focus on his journey is, I think, really important. And she talks about sort of his grandmother who immigrated to Manchester in '53. But she also talks about how he responded to what he focused on as a student, Parisian couture, which informed sort of, you know, his process as a young designer. And then she says, when people, she quotes Davis saying, when people like me are doing research, we ask questions. And I thought that was such a poignant thing, and I really liked how she brought that in. So according to her, Davis's approach at fashion school and his collection at Fashion East were informed by Western couture houses such as Balenciaga, for example, but he brought something else. He brought some very hard questions to the way that he engaged with Western fashion. So how are these iconic moments in fashion design history informed by the erasure of Black experience? And I think that's what he meant by that statement. I'm asking some difficult questions of Western fashion. And I think in that sense, he is a very, very exciting appointment, as you say, Toni, for an Italian house like this, which is about whiteness and is defined through whiteness. So what do we feel then, does his experience and this extraordinary rise, because it's unprecedented to be in this position as a young designer like this, what is the importance of asking uncomfortable questions as a young Black creative director? Do we think that he's asking them through the way that he is approaching the first collection?
I think so, definitely. I have to correct myself because I said Jamaican earlier, Trinidadian. But yeah, I think he is. I think there was an interesting point in like the research points that talked about, you know, seeing Blackness within luxury, and that's still even such a recent thing when it comes to casting, when it comes to like certain aspects of fashion. And I think he really is asking that question, that what does this look like? What does Blackness and luxury look like? Yeah. But it's done in a very like authentic way. It's not like, oh, we're going to do this big statement and have like 30 Black models, whatever it is. But you know, it's just about, it's a balance, you know what I mean? I feel like it's done in a very authentic way that feels very seamless, that I feel like an Italian customer can see this collection and be like, how is, you know what I mean? It's like any other major fashion house. It's the same, you know? Before we were kind of excluded in these spaces, and now we're not. So even looking at this collection, it just feels like this is always how it should be, do you know what I mean? And I think the way he designs in terms of just like, you see quite elements of just this really gorgeous luxury. I think even growing up within the Black experience, you kind of, you know, he talks about his grandma's Sunday best, and you see that within the collection, and it does trickle down in like Caribbean and African culture too, with like your grandparents kind of like Sunday best, or if you've got a party to go to, like you will go to a tailor and get it made, and you can see like these kind of aspects of tailoring and construction that you can just tell that he's lived through these experiences, and you can see that in the collection. So yeah, I think I definitely think he's definitely touching, asking these questions. And I also do think it was very respectful, which sounds weird to say. It wasn't like this, I've come here and it's, bye, Ferragamo. You know, there was still this element of Italianness to it. It still felt I would see it and be like, it's not so far removed from its world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think that's when you go to a house with so much heritage, you have to be so respectful with like the archives and things like that, but still make it your own. And I feel like he's done such a brilliant job. Even just his color red, I feel like it's now become quite synonymous to him, just this idea of this, because you kind of see it throughout his actual personal work, this idea of this color red, and I think it's definitely, yeah, I think it's a match made in heaven, I think. If this is his first debut, I could just imagine. I'm already excited to see the campaigns, I'm excited to see the next season and everything, so yeah.
The connection with the family that you've mentioned, Toni, I think is also really interesting. I teach contextual studies at the master's program at the Brussels-based fashion school at La Cambre Mode. And I see a lot of mood boards with grandmothers, with pictures, with old photographs of family. And I think that is part of the process. I think it's a beautiful thing for students to go back when they're design and they go back to their history. But it's something very, very different if it comes from a Black experience and Black perspective. And what that does to asking questions, to addressing, to looking at Western fashion and to reimagine it or to unpack it and to criticize it. And I think that's to come back to asking difficult questions, I think is really interesting. On the other hand, I think what I wanted to bring out as well in your response, Toni, which I thought was great, is how we interpret elegance differently. And I think it might be also good to maybe reflect on what elegance means in his work. Maybe, the Fashion East collection or the debut at Ferragamo. How does Davis interpret elegance?
I think there's a real restraint in what he does. Mm-hmm. It's not kind of shoving ideas in your face that, whether or not they're meant to be offensive, because I think everything was quite refined and sophisticated. And again, he isn't pushing these ideas down your throat. Mm-hmm. He's kind of softly introducing them.
It's almost, when you were saying about him doing research, it's a very clear mission statement that he follows through. He's almost like making sure that the new classic, the new refined elegance does involve people of color and more diversity in general. And I think that's what's really strong about his work, is that his work always looks very timeless and very impactful, but it's quite restrained. And I thought it was really beautiful the way the setup of the show looks like the pictures that him and Raphael Pavarotti produced, just like that really stark, powdery, like that cinnabar red color. It's really strong. And they look like classic 80s perfume ads almost, like something very elegant and timeless. And I think it's interesting. It's a very subdued way of asking those questions that he was talking about, I think.
These pieces are also interesting. We're looking at Fashion East now, those images that are coming up that we can see, and that the very iconic image with the diving mask, and this one I think is also, there are different references here, aren't they? So I can see Pierre Cardin references, especially with those first few looks. And again, it's looking at Italian sort of luxury fashion or Parisian fashion, but then reimagining that and sort of questioning our idea of elegance, which I think sums up his work really well. I want to come back to the show notes for a minute. And in the show notes, I'm just going to also quickly read that quote. I wanted to pay tribute to Salvatore's start by bringing in the culture of Hollywood, but new Hollywood, the ease and sensuality, its sunset and sunrise. I thought that's the first sentence in the show notes, and I thought that was a really interesting thing. Definitely sort of left a breadcrumb for me when I did the research, and I did a little bit, went down the rabbit hole, and looked at Ferragamo's history. Ferragamo, or Salvatore, he was an immigrant himself, and he left Italy in 1915, And he moved to Boston first, and then to California, and then eventually to Hollywood, and became a shoemaker. So he learned the trade or the craft of shoemaking in Boston, and then set up his own business in Hollywood, working with glamorous Hollywood stars during that sort of golden age of Hollywood. So it's a really, really interesting moment. But it's 1915 was the time of the First World War, and then setting up in Santa Barbara with his store, and working with film directors as well, and creating these amazing designs. And I think that connection is really interesting, and I think it's really poignant that is picked up by the designer, but that he's also making that statement, that he's looking at that history and saying, I'm not interested in that old idea of glamour. He's doing it again, isn't he? I want to imagine a new Hollywood. I want to imagine a new kind of glamour. So, and I think so. Yeah, we have a Gloria Swanson, for example. So this would be one of those sort of really super glamorous stars of that time. But part of that story is also sort of this idea of Orientalism, that was still really dominant in Hollywood and fashion. And Salvador Ferragamo created designs for this film, for example, The Thief of Baghdad, which is with Douglas Fairbanks, as you can see here, who's basically blacked up in that film. And that's not unusual. It's not unusual for that, at that time. So this idea of the stories of Arabia and these very romanticized ideas of what the Orient would look like. But from our perspective today, we have to be very critical of that. That's not something that we can look at without questioning it. So I find that show note interesting. So this is the journey of that house, and this is how it started. So there is a famous mule, which is part of this one, which was part of that film, and so it was inspired by that film, and it's called The Oriental Mule by Salvador Ferragamo. How do we feel about that heritage of a brand that is now, how does that resonate with you guys?
I mean, I think there's always going to be kind of a level of discomfort, especially because even as an Italian immigrant, he's still coming from a very white perspective. Mm-hmm. So again, kind of appropriating these aesthetics and these ideas and looking back at it now, there is a level of discomfort there. And I think with Maximilian's debut, there were a few pieces that kind of felt like it was playing with that idea of Orientalism, like this, these sheathy dresses, and the way he had like headscarves was interesting. And I don't know if I want to label it as inappropriate, but it is something that should be brought into question.
It's certainly something that we come across as fashion designers, as researchers, as fashion historians, and it sits in that context of that time. But I think we are at a moment now in academia, in the fashion industry, where we can look at these very uncomfortable stories and we can, sort of reimagine them in some way. I don't know. What do you think, Vi?
Well, then the question also becomes, why reviving Ferragamo?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, he's been dead for 60 plus years, and I don't know, because I think in a way fashion has a lot to do with Hollywood, not just in connection, but it seems much like now in Hollywood you can't get a movie produced if it's not existing IP, like something that with really famous people, brands. Like there's always this need for, it's only heritage brands that put money into them. And so the question is even, I don't know, it's more, not that we should ignore the past of this, but it's also what's the relevance of this brand now today? Why are we even doing this? If that's, I don't know, the question as well.
To create value, to make money.
Of course, yeah, to make money.
I mean, if I owned Ferragamo, I would, and I want to at some point, whatever my exit plan is, I can see that at some point it's flatlining, if not declining, especially in a heritage brand like this. My guess is that a lot of their products are a little bit like we always think of them, you know, the classic shoe, whatever it is, and if you kind of have one, do you need to buy several of them? And some models make it really work. Financial models can really make that work, but some of them I think just cannot, and so they need to do something to bring it back up again, because at the moment it's going to decline, and then there goes that business. So I mean, it's obvious, I know, profitability, but that is usually the stem of almost every
and
entity.
it's a historically very conservative brand. Like it's the brand of, when I think of Ferragamo, I also always think of the story of Condoleezza Rice buying shoes during Hurricane Katrina. Like that was the whole scandal. So I always think of that when the name comes up, but anyway. Of course it's to make value, like the same way that, you know, every superhero movie will, like every superhero that ever was created will have a movie. It's just, is it like to right a wrong then we're using like a design, not using, but, you know, a designer who's a person of color to is it to right a historical wrong? Is it to, because this is a brand of like,
is it
very
trendy even?
conservative.
I mean, you know, and that's usually, I mean, you've seen it done before, you may have seen it done before, maybe not with a person of color, but maybe, I don't know, just anybody who's a bit more contemporary, more modern, I don't know, whatever it is, whatever creates a buzz while you're sitting here talking about it now, all that is everything that directly relates to that brand awareness, that value, that everything that you can extract. If I was an investor, this is this type of stuff I want. We wouldn't be talking about this if there wasn't this. So there is that, absolutely, you know, in 10 years time, whatever they want to do with this brand, you will see a rise in it just by sheer, you know, just chatting about this right now.
I think your question is interesting as well, because it's like talking about the uncomfortable past, but it's like, you know, it's interesting in terms of like, I guess with all these Oriental kind of references in the past, when you do it from a non-authentic place, sometimes it becomes costume, so it's not clothing anymore really, it's kind of like you're dressing up to look like a certain, you know, culture or whatever it is. Whereas I guess the way Max did it here was more like, it doesn't really feel as costumey. It feels more like I would probably go into the store and want to buy that dress, but I'm not trying to appropriate a culture. Whereas when you look at the old Hollywood stuff, like you know, you show the shoe reference, that's fully like, it's basically costume.
It is a costume.
And then you name it the all the names in the world.
It's also costume for a film.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But like, I still feel like it still feels
of course.
very like, feels more authentic in terms of like how it's done today.
I think I agree with you in the kind of authentic way that Maximilian kind of went through this aspect of Ferragamo. But I think it's interesting that we're kind of referring to it as Orientalism in Hollywood as something in the past when it really exists today. I think a lot of the looks here kind of look like ready-to-wear versions of the costumes in Dune.
Right.
And like a little bit of Star Wars, and with the red sand, I mean, I'm just saying.
That film, I found that very upsetting, actually, yes, from that perspective, for sure.
Dune.
Yeah, highly problematic. So, very interesting. There is obviously a long relationship between Hollywood and the fashion industry, and there are other designers who worked in Hollywood, and some were more successful than others or felt that experience as a sort of a comfortable one. We always say that there's a shift that we associate chic with sort of fashion or Western fashion and glamour with Hollywood. But to me, it just really struck me that he used that as the first sentence in his press release. He's telling us something here, and perhaps, you know, an engagement with that history, but perhaps also acknowledging that enormous power that Hollywood has as mass communication entertainment, and sort of a hint to that is obviously sort of combining those two worlds. It's not new, but it's definitely a really smart thing to do, and it is I think. A comfortable reference to make. And you need to make a connection with the original designer, and he chose to do it in this way. I wanted to also talk about the rebranding, and I'm sure that's on everyone's mind. Peter Saville has reimagined the logo. Peter Saville has imagined several logos in the past. Burberry is one, for example, and there is obviously, because of the new CEO, there is a direct connection with that transition. I love the red. We've mentioned the red already. How do we feel about dropping Salvatore, dropping the font, going to this style? How do we feel about it? Is it a brave choice?
Obviously, I don't think it's a brave choice at all. I think it's following in line with like so many other luxury brands. He really could have made a move that was pushing branding forward rather than this cut and paste
Following a
idea.
template.
Yeah. I love the red though.
Same.
I wonder how much Peter Saville gets for those
Yeah,
rebrandings.
he
And
knows
how many-
exactly how to do it now.
How many houses in London he's buying with that? Yeah, I think it feels like a very commercial move, but I also don't know if it's I don't know the scale of leeway like Maximilian himself was given, for example, with a choice like that, because it's a big brand, and also it's one of the only self-owned brands that remains in Milan, I think.
I don't know.
I think Ferragamo, no one. I think it's
still the family.
Yeah, I think it's still the family that owns it. So it's quite.
So if that's the case, though, then it depends on ultimately your shareholders are going to be the person that make the decision, right? Whoever your chairman is. And I actually don't know who the chairman is of Ferragamo, but if it is a family, if it's somebody who's still within the family, that is a massive departure for somebody to come in to be able to do that, because ultimately that's...
Yeah, but that's why I don't know if
legacy.
I don't know. I wasn't there, but I don't know who made that choice, because it feels so in line with what everyone else is doing. That's a bit surprising. But about the original designer, Salvatore never made clothes. So it's also something to like, you kind of have to imagine, because that's why I think in the show he references a lot of more the 80s and 90s of Ferragamo, because I think Salvatore himself never actually made clothes. So that's also a bit of a hodgepodge of a brand to come into.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. So we're not super excited about the new logo then.
I think it signifies a change, right? So that's always a good,
It
irrespective of what
signifies
the, So I think that's always good, to show the inflection point between the old and the new. I think that's good. But then, I mean, I'm not a creative, super creative, but of course, it sounds like the actual logo itself might not be a complete new wave of pushing that boundary, as you mentioned.
It's definitely a sign of a clean slate. I mean, I think it's nice how it sits there in that shoe. I think that looks beautiful. It's no longer a signature, and I think that is, also really important. If we could have an image of the old logo and what that looked like, because that was the signature of the designer, which is in a direct connection to that person, isn't it? So it's much more personal. So I think you have to let that here, that one, for example, you have to let that go if you want to start with a clean plate, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, this is completely just with my corporate hat on, but I wonder what this is signaling for what they want to do, what the family wants to do. I mean, if you're looking at something rebranding, new freshness, taking off something like that, which just so resonates with the person that it stemmed from. I mean, what do you think it is that maybe they're looking to sell, right? Maybe they're looking to sell, and maybe they've had enough of this. I don't know. I mean, obviously, pure speculation, but it's just this is the type of stuff that you would be doing, getting ready for change, getting ready to move on. I don't know. Could be a sign.
That's a really interesting perspective to have. Thank you. I quite like it. So I know, agreeing. I quite like it, and it's not, it's a bit different to the other new one. So
it's really beautiful. It's really beautiful.
Love the red.
But
We just love the red.
yeah. What kind of shade of red is it?
I don't know. I also liked so when we look at the Instagram account for a minute, just to have that there for a moment, and just to say a little bit about the show itself. We haven't really looked at individual looks on the show, so maybe now it would be a good moment to do that. I know, V, you've mentioned some references already that you feel style references. But is there anything that really strikes you? And obviously, Toni, you were there. Tell us a little bit about that buzz and what it felt like to be at the show.
Yeah, the buzz was just beyond. I mean, I think my favorite looks were those last dresses at the end, at the very end, because in real life the way they moved was just insane, and because it was such a seamless like transition, between this beautiful like crystallized, whatever you want to call it, this kind of crystallized mesh moment here, not mesh, but you know what I mean, into this kind of like more opaque fabric. It was just so breathtaking, these looks. They were just insane. It felt very emotional as well being there too.
Okay.
When you get to the end, like a lot of people crying. Like,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Shows with people crying is my favorite.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's stunning.
Yeah, these are my favorites, I think.
Amazing. Were there any particular looks that really struck you, or that sort of touched on those elements that we talked about? Elegance, Hollywood, glamour, asking, reimagining a history of a house.
I thought some of the menswear, especially near the end, had a really regal quality to it. I also thought it was, as a show, really sexy in a way that I would never relate to Ferragamo.
Yeah, they had that like men's look, which was like those little boy shorts.
Yeah, I love that.
Which was fabulous when that came out. It was like a leather, was it leather? I think it was leather. Was it earlier?
I think the men's specifically for me had a really perverse quality to it.
There we go, yeah.
That one is almost like dungeon mastery to me with the hood up. And there's
Still kind of street a little bit.
yeah,
Kind of bombery as well.
kind of kinky. There was also those trousers with the like red cross straps that were almost
That panel.
harnessy. Those little boy shorts are amazing.
One of the things that's mentioned in the show notes, which also struck me, is that Max is talking about fetishism as well. And I think it's interesting, Joshua, that you're bringing that up. To me, I think I've noticed that when looking at the shoes again, and I did because it is a shoe heritage brand. I looked at the shoes. Would it be possible to see an image of the heel with the logo? I don't know if that came up. So yes, so the heel is replaced with the Ferragamo logo, which I think some designers have done in the past, and maybe we can go and have a look for a minute. And it's interesting also to sort of think about the difference between the brand and the logo. And we focused on the logo just now, that big sort of drastic change. But to replace the heel and turn the heel into the logo is also, I think, something that, it's not the very first time that it has been done, but I think it's in acknowledging the sexualization.
The Ganchani,
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So I don't know if we have an image of that, but I'm sure we can find it. So it's you pronounce it perfectly.
Ganchani?
The Ganchani.
It's like an inverted omega.
And that replaces the heel on the stiletto. And that sort of reference to eroticism, fetishism, and then turning the symbol of the brand into that fetish, I think is a really subtle and really interesting thing of making a collection seem sexy, but also just coming and saying, okay, this is what we are about. I thought that those references are really strong and really interesting.
Yeah. I don't know like if fetishistic is the right word though. It's very, very sexy, but I think it's interesting that now we tend to, whenever something's sexy, we tend to go to the term fetish. I think it's a very sexy collection, but I don't know if it's fetishistic, outside of fetishizing the logo. But maybe if you go on the details of the show.
It's the current show. We're gonna just have a look if we can find that.
Can we get detailed pictures of the? No. Okay.
All right. Okay. I found it was there yesterday, but maybe something changed.
Can we go on Vogue Runway to see them? Or no? Okay, sorry.
Do we like that use of the logo?
Do we like the use? Yeah, no, I think that's also my question. Do we like it if we take the symbol of the brand, like, I don't know who else done it. Chanel has done it, they put the double C's in the heel.
YSL.
Who else would have done it?
YSL?
YSL has done it very famously, of course.
Sorry?
I'm not sure how comfortable those YSL.
No, I don't think
These
so.
ones are a bit more comfortable. I think it's interesting. I think your shoes are your foundation, isn't it? So it's almost like, is it kind of like a respect, or is it kind of like an ode to obviously Ferragamo being a shoe designer, but also like he's always going to be, is it omnipresent? He's always going to kind of be within the house, always, isn't it? So you can drop the Salvatore, but he's always going to, you know what I mean? So is that kind of like almost like a symbolic of just having this, your shoes are your foundation, you know, if you can't walk, if you can't use your legs, for example, you can't,
they are.
you know what
That's
I mean?
it. Thank you.
So it's an interesting take of it.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
We can't talk about this relaunch without looking at these shoes.
I think I love it.
They're amazing.
They're astounding, right? Yeah.
I mean, I also wonder just how much of like Ferragamo's business is in those logo belts and loafers.
Yeah. Agreed.
So kind of redoing it in such a modern and interesting way is brilliant.
I mean, I think that is not just sexy. I would say that is fetish.
Sure.
Yeah.
But it's also almost like, you know, this whole like logo mania kind of trend, but it's doing it like that, but doing it very like in a quite a classy sort of way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed to having like a massive like.
Again, really restrained,
Yeah,
which
very
is, I think,
understated.
really is how you, it's what Maximilian's about.
I think anything with a logo really, I mean, now I'm looking at it purely from a consumer point of view, is the thing that will sell and the thing that people like, you know, like my parents who are immigrants, right? They, like Chinese immigrants, what they think of when they think of Ferragamo is a logo, and it is something they want to show off in order to be able to, I don't know, to show that they bought something that has, you know, a house behind it. It's good quality, you know, the Italian quality, etc. So, I mean, I definitely think that, having something in there might entice that extra bit of, you know, consumerism that you need to ultimately create the profitability that you need.
The easiest way to buy into his world, and to buy into this new brand.
It's interesting that you mentioned that though as well, because that is also something that Salvatore Ferragamo is associated with. As an immigrant, he was one of the first to establish that idea of made in Italy and the mythology around that as a designer who was based in California to create this sort of that notion of it's about craftsmanship, it's about skill, and with his shoes also it was always about comfort. So that connection is interesting. I have got one other shoe that I wanted to compare that with, and that is the reverse pyramid. Another example of Orientalism, I guess one could argue, but again, a very iconic style. And this was again in connection with a film that sort of looked at Egyptian culture, and then this shoe was a product or an inspiration by this from this film. So it's interesting to compare that then with the logo shoe that we have in this collection. So equally strong statement. You understand it if you understand and know that brand and the symbol, but then it's not ashamed of turning it into a fetish, of sort of being really confident, but then also bringing in that restraint at the same time that you mentioned. I totally agree. I think that's a great comment, Josh. I think that works really well in this when looking at these shoes. Now, do we feel that sense of Ferragamo of turning it into a ready-to-wear brand? Do you think it is going that direction? Should we not pay attention to the shoes anymore? It's just because of what Max is bringing to the house?
I think something that we could really get into is how Max put his own label on hold to kind of take on his tenure at Ferragamo. And obviously with that comes a bit of money and a bit of backing and connections with production to kind of bring his vision to life in a way that he just couldn't with his own brand. And I think you definitely see that with this debut, and the fabrications that he uses feels really elevated when his Fashion East collections were already quite elevated for his age.
What, I mean, they were crying at the end. Obviously, now that's like, it's stuck with me, Toni. That's like,
Happy tears.
that's really interesting. What was the music? Do you remember?
I'm not gonna lie, I actually don't remember. That might be because I just came from a flight. So it's all kind of blurred into one in terms of how many shows I've been to. I don't want to did I say it wrong?
And that setting?
Well, I would say, yeah, the texture on the floor when you walked against, it was like was it a sand?
Was it sand?
I think it was a sand. Felt great under your I don't want to get your toes into it. So that's, I feel like I remember that more than the music, which was quite interesting.
Right.
I remember kind of walking in the texture, and it felt very airy because it was outside, so you felt very, you kind of actually felt quite small in relation to how big the space was. That's what it made you kind of feel like. You kind of almost walked in and you were like
intimate.
You know what I mean? Which a lot of shows are like that. I mean, Chanel, they do all these crazy things, but for some reason that did feel quite poignant. You did feel very like small in the grand scheme of things. That's the kind of energy it felt. But yeah, in terms of the museum, yeah, guys, I'm tired. I remember the textured floors was great. So, but it definitely was such an energy. Definitely such an energy.
I think in terms of sort of summing up our discussion, what really strikes me, and that I get a sense that this is a momentous event, and I think I think we can all agree, also from your responses at the beginning, how unprecedented this appointment is, and how significant it is at a time like this. Also, where Italy is going through enormous political change, and it is an Italian house. And this is something I think that we need to be aware of, the political and historical context in which we find ourselves in, and to appoint a black young designer with this kind of vision and who is asking uncomfortable questions, I think is something that I find really admire, and I'm very excited about it, and I can't wait to see where it goes. So. Any closing statements from you guys? Anything that this is mine? Anything you'd like to add?
I think it's a really difficult, I'm sure it's a very exciting project for him because it's a very difficult brand to take over because it doesn't have, outside of like the belts and the perfumes, like it doesn't have, when you think of Ferragamo, you don't necessarily think of specific clothing, which having a blank canvas is also sometimes a bit terrifying. And I think he's doing a great job with like the first opening looks like being like this very like what I think of when I think of Ferragamo, like those late 80s, early 90s beige ladies like Lauren Bacall, who funny enough also wore Ferragamo shoes in the 40s, but like covered in beige draperies with like a stark red bags, like weren't they like those red bags with the silver writing in the 90s? And like a lot of what people used to call American sportswear, like it's very like, it's not couture, it's like those drapey. I said earlier that I think it feels very referential of Halston. So like the draped jerseys, even the ultra suedes, like those straight suede looks are very Halston as well. The closing dresses that Toni loves, they feel like those Halston bias cut dresses, and also. The jewelry, the bags that have little wristlets, or all the jewelry that feel very inspired by Elsa Peretti and those like organic shapes.
So here we see, jewelry for Tiffany's.
I think it's an interesting, because he's always been very good doing this sort of very elegant silhouette, and it's this, like late 80s, early 90s elegance but 30 years later and completely updated. I think there's something, like the bias cut dresses at the end, for example, or like the jewelry. that you see there. It's really interesting.
That's
I think
a
it's like,
really nice reference to point out. Thank you. And yes, that looks very close to what you've just described. Absolutely. Any other closing statements?
I think looking specifically at the menswear, it's a very covetable collection. I hate to tack it on at the end, but I would love to see some body diversity in the future from Maximilian and from Ferragamo. It feels kind of dated when we look at the shows leading up to this, who a lot of the brands have been really pushing themselves to include more sizes on the runway. And that was clearly very much lacking here.
It's unusual for a designer of this generation, perhaps, but yeah.
at least they're beautifully made, beautifully tailored clothes, because it's great to have like diversity and representation, but if it's to put people in ill-fitting things, like a lot of people are doing, it's not that great either.
But then I'd love for him to challenge himself
Exactly.
to do that.
No, exactly.
Because if we're talking
Yeah.
about elegance and sophistication and only attributing it to a size 0, what does that say about us in fashion and society?
Okay, that's a fair point. Any other closing statements? Toni, what were your thoughts?
I think it's a brilliant first debut collection. I feel like now as we go, I mean, I went to the show, but now as we go through the collection, kind of looking at it more, it feels very, very, very much like him, a lot like his own brand. So that's also an interesting to think about. Because, you know, you mentioned him putting his brand on hold as well for the appointment. And then you do what, like, not that you do wonder, but it does feel like an extension of the brand, you know, his own namesake brand. So it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how it develops and how it develops the codes in terms of the clothing. And is there going to be like signature silhouettes that we're going to see time and time again? Is he going to define it in that sort of way? What's autumn winter going to be like? Are we going to see some femboy shorts in autumn winter? I'm not sure. No, but it's very interesting, and obviously even the notes are talking about like fetishism and stuff like that. Even looking at some of those looks, they kind of felt like it was like a heat transfer sort of fabric, which is quite an interesting take. This idea of being hot, or you know, like this idea of being hot and sexy, I guess. You kind of see that within clothing. Yeah,
there's a real tactility in like the suede and that wet look.
Yeah, like these ones.
Sensual.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're actually, like if that was like a pattern or if it was like actual, you know, you can kind of have a fabric that kind of changes through temperature. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm excited for autumn winter. Let's see how sexy we can get that season. So.
I wonder if he's gonna go crazier as well, because you know, in his own shows, he always had like very elegant silhouettes, and there's always the last silhouette was always a bit more of a showpiece, like. And obviously this is not in this one, which I think for a first outing it's understandable. But yeah, it's interesting, like, you know, this like finale, because he always had like if you look the first 4 seasons, it's the last silhouette's always like almost like a showgirl, like very intense piece.
Yeah, even in that look felt
the
very
one
like
after,
Trinidadian, like carnival kind of referencing. So it'd be interesting if, like you said, maybe he's just kind of starting off very respectful.
Which, you know, can't be blamed for that. It's very, like, it's really interesting.
Well, thank you very much. It's, really, really interesting, and I love how you all responded from your perspectives, and it's going to be just really, very exciting to see where he will take it next. So I think he deserves an applause from us. And thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing your impressions. Okay.
Thank you for having me.